Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Turtlecast. You're here this morning with a special guest, Mathis Shinnick. Mathis Shinnick is from Optipulse. If you could have ever thought that a light photon would be carrying information, well, good for you. He's the one that made a business out of it. So, Mathis, please kick it off and tell us a little bit about this technology you have here that's actually quite incredible. We'd love to hear how this thing kind of got started and where you see it headed in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
Pleasure to be able to get out there and talk about this. Awareness is everything. And that's part of what our technology does. It's connectivity. We're able to utilize light-emitting photonic devices, and I promise not to go too technical on this, but a unique way of producing laser-quality light through the atmosphere that can carry billions of bits of data a second. In fact, right now we're at 10 gigabits a second. I'll say single channel because that's very important for those that follow this type of technology.
So if I understand something here, the atmosphere, right? If the sun or the moon's baking down on the earth or starlight, whatever it might be, it gets diffused, right, through the particles in the atmosphere.
Right.
So you're saying that you have a device that essentially emits light, and that light is carrying information with it.
Yes.
And you can send light targetedly towards some other receiving object.
Yes. The approach we take is based in terms of our patents and the way we utilize light. And think of an array of points of light. So 9 points of light, 105 points of light, 10,000 points of light, all pulsing exactly the same at 20 billion pulses a second, so 10 gigabits a second. That amount of data, then, when it puts through our optical system, gets collimated into a beam, much like a flashlight.
Yeah.
Right, or a big spotlight. And that big spotlight then goes through the air, and anywhere within that spot is the message. So at the far end, when it hits the collector lenses and the detector, is focused back down. As long as that detector is somewhere within that spot, you've got a signal. So raindrops, snowflakes, dust to some degree, those are all things that capture a little bit of light, but doesn't stop all the light. And the best way I like to explain it is if you're standing in a rainstorm or looking out your window and it's raining, and you look across the street and you see a street light, that light is coming through your eyes. It's the same thing that our device is doing.
You know, I'm always looking out the window crying, waiting for Jason to come call me over to the studio. So is there like a margin of error within this thing? You know, if somebody has to understand, so these two devices have to be pointed at one another.
Yes, line of sight.
Okay, so I had Starlink show up the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the earlier people in New Mexico to get this. And I know that it's going to readjust to where it's receiving that K-band or whatever it is coming from space.
Right.
Is this in its own special type of band of frequency if it's emitting light? And what is the benefit of this in comparison to what fiber optic technology does, where I have a very thin piece of glass and I'm essentially pulsing light through that?
Glad you brought up fiber cable.
Why would I remove the medium?
Right. This is essentially fiber cable through the air is what it is.
Okay, here we go for metaphors. That worked.
Yeah. So we've got the ability to extend from a fiber cable drop point.
Yeah.
Right. You'll be able to go up to our emitter detector, one unit, and send that out through the air. So you don't have to pull the permits, hire the construction crew, dig the trenches, find your way through it. You don't have that time element there. Plus you don't have the cost of doing all that. So if you compare it to something like Starlink, which is beaming down.
Oh yeah, in cells.
Radio frequency.
Right.
We're in the light spectrum. We're actually near infrared. So we're at 980 nanometers, 1,000.
So it's actually a rather long wave?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And so what we're actually doing with this is because you can't see the beam, and it is eye safe, you can't see the beam, but that signal is coming through a light spectrum. So you're not in any of the regulated RF band spectrums. You can't regulate light. You don't have light interfering with light. So one of the benefits of our technology is, you don't have radio frequencies causing noise as they overlap. So one of the problems with something like Starlink or other radio frequencies is that they can conflict and you get noise. So you have to have special devices that filter that out. You got to have the tracking capability.
Correct.
Now you go back to the point about line of sight. Yes, we are line of sight. So you have to be able to see both sides. So the detector and the receiver have to be able to see both sides.
So, like, no pun intended, what's the targeted audience then?
Well, we're all about connectivity.
Okay.
So raise it up to what this means. We're greener. The power consumption to run our devices is a fraction of what it costs to run the devices that are putting RF radio waves out there. We are smaller form factor, so we use less material. So there, and again, smaller footprint. We're connectivity in the sense that we want to be able to bring this out as a utility. We've purposely structured the company so that we have control over how it's deployed.
Okay.
Which means we could put this across the whole state of New Mexico at a fraction of cost it would take to run fiber cable or other type of connecting devices, so fixed wireless, for example. So we can connect in telehealth, telemedicine, job training, work from home. And it is our goal to be able to do that at a significantly reduced price. So essentially, access to high-speed broadband for all.
That's interesting. So say, for instance, I have one drop line here in the center of Albuquerque or Santa Fe. From that, I have a central tower, and I have a near-infrared beam sending out in multiple directions if I choose to, other receiving ones. Right. So I could have 20 different pueblos essentially linked up off of this one central hub and spoke model I'm sending out.
That's right.
This node.
That's right.
And they'll capture, and then that'll drop a fiber line into their homes from that other pole where they might be.
That could be. Yes, yes. Right now, we could take existing 4G technology and make it faster, enable it. And I say that because if you think of what's going on between your cell phone, computer, and a tower someplace.
Right.
So we don't, at this stage, we don't beam right down to a cell phone.
No, we don't.
We don't. What we do is we take the data that's coming off of cell phones to a tower. That data that gets to that tower, we're connecting tower to tower to tower to tower to data center to fiber drop point. And that's in the industry called backhaul.
Yeah.
So essentially it's the big pipe that collects all this information. For those in New Mexico, the Balloon Fiesta, actually around the world, it's a well-known thing. Balloon Fiesta, you get tens of thousands of people in a concentrated area. If you don't have the pipe coming in and out that can move the data in and out, you end up having frustration because you can't send that video. You can't make that call. It drops. And this is one of the real-life experiences at that Fiesta. So it could be anywhere in the world where you've got a major event and you're having problems because your pipe isn't big enough. Well, we expand that pipe. Another way to look at it is to look at it as a highway. All right?
Like a Chinese superhighway? Because Jason knows I love those metaphors.
Okay. So we're a Chinese superhighway, right? And it's still not big enough.
No, it's not.
Right? Because they're using traditional technology. So if you look at what we're able to do is we can expand the number of lanes.
Okay.
Right? So that your on-off ramps can flow right in. So the more data you bring in, the more data you take off on this highway. The more lanes you have, the faster that traffic flows.
So then let me ask, is it variable then? So say I do pump in a couple million people at one time.
Right.
Which would naturally bog down any regular cell tower with the backhaul system that they have currently set up.
Right.
Do you guys have an adaptive model where it'll just naturally expand to the amount of people coming in and can manage that throughput, or do you have to set that ahead of time?
Well, what we do right now is there's networking to all of this. That is a part of some of the partners that we've got.
Okay.
So we're not at this point network companies. We're connectivity in the sense of that backhaul. So we set our upside limit at 10 times, 20 times what's available now.
Okay.
And I say that because that's 10 gigabits a second. And I'll come back to that number because it's what the off-the-shelf electronics
can handle
at
the
handle
moment.
Right now.
Right.
We're designing our own high-speed electronics so that we can go 20, 25. And our chips have been tested at 25 and higher. So we know that we can keep increasing the upside. Now, the only necessary thing that we would have to do in that situation is either swap out the electronic board or the device itself to go from 10 gigabits to 20 gigabits. But in most situations where you've got that 10 gigabit capability, 10 gigabits per second capability, it'll take years before the data demand utilizes that.
So you're saying there's essentially a plug-and-play technology to the way you've designed this. So the way everybody typically gets screwed on most infrastructures, especially the ones that are here, that states opt into, is that they put it in and then it's almost impossible to update later. And it took so much debt to front load this thing to get the infrastructure in place that they're like, oh, we're going to keep this we're incentivized to keep this for a while. Look how much we paid for in the beginning.
Right.
In sense of the cost structure, installation, accessibility, and the ability to upgrade to the future as we do increase that sort of data throughput.
Right.
Are you guys able to adapt with that at OptiPulse?
Yes. Yes. We
prove it. Tell me.
We like to say we're complementary.
Okay.
Right. So you've got existing fiber in the ground, and you're a fiber operator, and you're looking at trying to get to that next community, and you know it's going to cost you $30,000 to go 1 mile. In New Mexico, soft dirt, maybe $80,000 to go in some other environment. If you're in a city, it's going to cost much more than that.
Correct.
Just to go 1 mile, right? So between that point where your fiber ends, you simply put in a link, and the fiber comes up to our emitter detector, and it goes to that community. Now they can backfill that, right? They can backfill that if they really want to get fiber there, but they have an immediate access to a market. Now, cost points, all very relevant, prove it, right?
Yeah.
So John Joseph, who's the inventor of this technology and my business partner in this, phenomenally bright mind, was able to design something that for the source of the light costs less than $1. And in volume production will be far less than that.
Yeah.
So we've got an emitter source, which you compare it to other communication emitter sources in the wireless spectrum, both radio frequency as well as light, and we're 1/10 or 1,000th the cost of those devices. And we use far less energy to operate it, and the electronics to run it are maybe $50, $25 in volume, $10 electronics board.
Yeah.
Right, so you're looking at something that could be well under $25 or $30 in order to have. And we've got the ability to do solid state alignment and maintain alignment, so we don't have to use gimbals.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things. We have a National Science Foundation grant. We had a phase 1, we completed that. We're now preparing for phase 2. And that's all about how we take these chips and put them in an array. So you have an array of arrays effectively.
Yeah.
You've got 10 by 10 of chips that have 61 light bits on them. So you can do the math.
Yeah, it's huge.
And that costs, maybe $100.
$100 to get a sub if you're doing it $1 per chip.
Yeah. $1 per chip plus, even less. And then the electronics, and you don't need to have all the gimbals involved in maintaining that alignment, because we can pulse through the chips themselves.
Sure.
As things move around. So we've got a cost advantage. And then that leads to size, weight, power consumption.
Mm-hmm.
It really brings the whole thing down to the point where it is extremely attractive from a cost point. Now, we intend to make it available. We have some great shareholders here, all angels, institutions, 90% New Mexican.
Yep.
We did a crowdfunding just recently on WeFunder, brought in 400 new investors.
Congratulations.
Oh, fantastic. Great group of people.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to expand that with the goal of having this be something that can close the digital divide, because we're not going to try to price it for return necessarily. And all these investors want a good return. But we're doing is we're pricing it for accessibility.
Okay, so what's that mean?
Well, that means if you're looking at having a service like Starlink, and what you're paying for Starlink.
I pay $3.30 a day.
$3.30 a day for what you're up and down.
300 Mbps.
Up and down.
Up, I think, was like 120.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you...
With a 61 millisecond latency.
Okay, so you're at what? $3 you said a day?
Yeah.
All right, so you're at $90 a month.
Mm-hmm.
We can be half of that.
Yeah, see, that's incredible.
Yeah. And we have some business partners that are some investors here in the state that are ISPs, internet service providers, rural telecom providers, who are very excited to try to get this. It's our job now to get to the point where we've got the devices expanding beyond the technology. But I just think of all the things that we could do in terms of bringing healthcare into the living room.
Right.
And the amount of data that needs to flow if you've got home testing devices that are keeping track of an individual and be able to send that data instantaneously, effectively, very low latency, to a center where you've got the doctors and the healthcare professionals that can deal with that, and the immediate response capability, the immediate awareness, because you can put a camera or something in there, they can turn it on and off, their control, but you can get that access and that immediate response so that you're not having to wait if you've got a crisis.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jason, in the military, you've been in a boatload of crises. What did communication look like?
Oh, yeah, it's pretty archaic. I mean, now it may have. I mean, this was the 90s when I was in.
Well, tell me about the 90s.
There was a lot of satellite, but it was intermittent. And we talked about that the other day with GPS and connecting into satellites. But I would think as far as because I was thinking about that, beside high-speed internet, because that seems like we were talking about, this transfer of data, what other applications, and maybe stick military, government, what other applications can you use that for? Like if we're in a desert in Iraq, has the military approached you or the labs or anything on these?
Well, we do have a couple of grants. So these SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research grants, one from the DoD. Well, I've actually had two from the DoD, and then the one from the National Science Foundation. And what I can say about that is battlefield communications, expanding the ability for everybody to communicate at the same speed.
Right.
So that high-speed communication. So be it soldiers on the ground, mobile command posts, to communicate within that field, going up to drones, going up to aircraft, going up to satellites. You have that ability, and it's light, invisible light, so it's near infrared, so it's not detectable like a radio frequency would be. So you're not, having the problem.
There's no Enigma machine.
Yeah,
that can figure this out.
Well, no, actually, that's
a good point.
I got a question about that. So let's talk about security.
Yeah,
you have a collection array, right? What for instance, the Drug Enforcement Agency right now and the feds have a thing where they'll essentially put in a fake node, a fake cell tower, because we know how all these signals are bouncing around, and they can collect all the IMIs and then trace back to figure out who owns that phone, the address, all that other information.
Right.
Well, are there other collection devices in here? So is it the actual photon carrying information, or is it the way the pulse of the wave of light is hitting the receivers that defines the information?
It's the pulse. It is the photon is the pulse, essentially. We are simply on-off keying, what's called OOK.
Okay.
So we're turning on and off 20 billion times a second
to
get that data out there. And that is then interpreted at the other end and converted back into a digital signal.
That's correct, yeah.
Right? Or back into light going through the fiber cable. So if you think of it in the sense of going back to the line of sight point to point.
Correct.
Right? So you've got a beam. Now our beam is 4 inches, 2 meters, right? We can expand that thing out. So we can detect within that beam if there's degradation because something is in the middle of it that's collecting information. We can shut that thing down.
That makes sense.
Right? But you got to find the beam. Now, if you can see visually two towers, you can kind of figure out where that beam's going to be. You got to figure out how to get up there with something that's going to actually collect the device. Well, there's creative people with drones and stuff that can do that.
Right.
But those are very, very easily identifiable events. Now, we can focus the beam down to a very tight beam, in which case any type of eavesdropping would be an immediate alarm. So that's
just
one
shuts right
aspect.
off.
Shuts right off. So one, you got to find the beam. If you don't see where the devices are, then you're not going to find the beam.
Yeah.
Two, you've got to get in the actual beam itself to capture anything. And as you start capturing things, you're taking light away from our detector, in which case it says fault and the thing shuts down. Now, our technology, going back to the low cost, low size, low weight, low power consumption, we can create mesh networks which allow the ability for, economically, that's why I brought up the point of the cost. We can create mesh networks or put mesh networks in place where you can switch between all the nodes. And in fact, that's one of the beauties of line of sight issues, is that if one gets blocked, a tree comes down, for example. If one gets blocked, then it can immediately switch to the next node and go route it back over. So we can put on top of buildings in a city, for example, say downtown Albuquerque, Midtown Manhattan. We can put them up on top of buildings, and if one of those links goes down, it just reroutes to the other links, and off you go.
What's our maximum range on this light?
Right now, we're operating at the 300 meters to 500 meters.
Yeah, because I was curious. Like, the Israelis came out with a cool technology for charging your device in a room. They essentially put a near infrared band up and then a receiver on the phone. So wherever you put it, it essentially tracks that and is pumping the energy towards it. Low wave energy. Is there do you see in the future, beyond just this point to point, actually sending it up to maybe a satellite or something that it tracks and then bouncing it back down? Because it would still have a faster rate than what you would get on a typical K-band from a satellite anyway.
Yeah, we've got, you're talking about watts of power in terms of optical power.
Yeah, that's correct. And would you mind just staying towards the mic so we can hear you? Because you cut out every time your turn.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I don't want anything important to get missed here, all right?
Well, yeah, if there was. Anyway, so the watts of power necessary to go ground to space is something our technology can do. In fact, John is working with various parties on that particular aspect right now. We have an entity in Albuquerque, Tau Technologies, that's been a business partner of ours, and we're working with them on the ground to space, space to ground challenge. It's not really a challenge, it's just really engineering what our chips can do into the actual device that's going to do it. So we can go LEO, we can go high altitude airships. There's another company in Albuquerque or in New Mexico, Sky, that is producing these high altitude airships. The ability to beam down from that to cover a wide area. I'm not that much looking forward to having more radiation beaming down on me.
Wait, so then how do you feel about 5G?
Well, 5G is incomplete. 5G hasn't yet actually been a success. So 5th generation is what it is, right?
Right.
So the technology, the protocol software to move that technology around is something that is being advanced with great speed by the Ericssons and T-Mobiles and Nokias of the world. But the physical infrastructure to make that happen, the small cell technology, right, that type of device is lagging. And so we look at it in a sense of the layers, right, within a communication network.
Right.
We're way down at layer 1. We're infrastructure. Maybe we get up to layer 2 as we start throwing IP addresses into our devices.
Got it.
We are agnostic as to what comes in and goes out. So you take a fiber cable, plug it into our device, you've got information coming in, we take that, convert it to light pulses, collect it, convert it back, and put it back in a fiber cable.
Sounds easy.
Okay? So that's where we are right now. So 5G, 6G, 7G, 8G, we look at it that we should go beyond 5G because it's not really performing and doing what it should do. So get past these generations and focus on it as a ubiquitous infrastructure that can carry massive amounts of data regardless of what form that data is in.
So you're saying that these these artificial steps that the telecommunications industry are taking, they're not being transparent with the technology available, and they're also not investing in it. Are they perversely incentivized to use 5G when they could be using other technologies like yourself? What prevents them from coming to Optipulse and saying, hey, we see what you're doing. We understand that the benefits. We understand that we can actually generate more traffic by using your systems. Let's have a conversation. Are they doing that? What is preventing them from doing that? Tell me what that looks like.
Well, there's history around what is here. I'm going to raise this back up here.
Yeah, go for it.
There's history around what optical wireless has looked like in the past. Free space optical. So we have history there. And that's because the actual light emitters back then aren't what we have now. And there's also massive investment in 5G. So it's not that they're not investing in it. They're taking a proven technology, in terms of radio waves at lower power levels, and they're trying to jack it up to higher power levels. Higher power levels mean more data can go through, simplified. Right?
So I got the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and I choose to put the Hellcat engine in it. Yes, it's faster. Is it safer? I don't know.
Yeah. Is it controllable? But that health aspects aside, what they're trying to do is enhance something they've already got. Now, there was a decision 5 years, 6 years, 10 years ago as to whether or not optical wireless or free space optical would work. Massive amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars were put into a number of companies trying to get that to work. And because it was point-to-point, single beam, not an array of beams, far more expensive emitter technology, tracking technology. So you got a single beam trying to hit a single detector, and you've got to keep
it's
that
a mess.
aligned.
You can't have any margin of error.
No, none whatsoever. And so cost, size, weight, functionality, and a lack of reliability. Essentially,
you can't talk about Jason like that.
Oh, I don't know.
Come on, he's in the room here.
Army,
That's awesome. Did you see his
Navy,
shirt, by the way?
Air Force, Marines.
Yeah, it's in the Marine
Marines,
Corps.
yeah.
Did you see his shirt, by the way, today?
I did see that shirt. Yes.
We've been fighting
New
fascism
Mexican-
since
a New Mexican
1492.
shirt,
Yeah.
There we go.
Somebody's got to do it. So,
Ground pounder comments aside.
yeah.
So what we can do with this is advance that infrastructure so that all of the protocols and, the ORAN, which is an open architecture for being able to have devices speak to each other.
Yes.
So Nokia devices talk to Ericsson, et cetera, which is important for factory floors. It's important for hospitals. It's important for most everything we're trying to do to put more data out there.
Right.
We can create that infrastructure pipeline, and they could call it 5G, they could call it 6G, they could call it, bazillion G. And yet our technology will be the fundamental infrastructure for being able to have all those advancements happen. And we're now, right now, after all this year of pandemic and all, with a heightened awareness of the fact that 5G just isn't getting there in terms of bringing people connected.
Yeah.
Bringing, school to the home because kids are at home, bringing work to the home. That's just not happening. In fact, I'll digress for one moment. There's a Washington Post article that's been shared multiple times about a researcher taking an array of phones, 5G phones, 4G phones, and going community to community, city to city, and testing them all.
Yeah.
And where 5G performed better, it was marginally better. But most of the time, the 4G phones had better reliability, connectivity, data transit, throughput. And so it's the infrastructure. I mean, the 5G phones probably work fine.
Yeah. I mean, like
It's the infrastructure.
my laptop, for instance, exceeds far beyond whatever the throughput of the internet here is, right?
Exactly.
Because it's capped off by Comcast.
It's going to a unit somewhere in the
Right.
wall, and that unit's got some cable or fiber. Or
We all got
something.
net loss somewhere, right?
Right, exactly.
So let's come back for part 2 to talk about what the future looks like with Optipulse and humanity.
Perfect.